Hello and welcome once again to Baked Beans Garage, where the script is all in my head, but it's still illegible. Today I'm getting ready for a 400-mile road trip. Let's see if the car is ready. Let's work on that. So if you've been following the build, you know that this here, my beloved dumpster fire, is a 1986 GTI that I may have gone upside down in a ditch in. Well, kinda. It's some of that car. A lot of it is better now. Go watch those videos. But obviously, it is still not quite done. My goal for this video is to have it be a car again, so it's going to be 100% complete by the end of this video, except for some servicings that has to happen under there, but we'll get to it. I want to start with the windshield. Oh, let me check something. I want to start with the windscreen for no particular reason. So in the second video on this series, I replaced this cowl panel here, if you'll remember how trashed the windshield frame is. As I mentioned in that video, I have now gone back and painted the frame itself with my favorite tractor paint catalyst hardener elixir. That makes it set up real nice and strong. To demonstrate, here's what I didn't use. That's pretty good. And the piece of glass I'm putting in, I don't recognize the manufacturer. I got this a couple years ago as a spare for a different Mark II. So don't ask where I got it, because I don't know anymore. And I'll freely admit, I am very much not a glass guy. But I think I'll be able to edit this to at least feign some competence. But I do know it's a good idea to cut the tip into a V shape. That way you put down a nice little wall of urethane, so it squishes out and gets nice, good adhesion. I'll also have to be careful to not make eye contact with these two dents I don't plan on doing anything about. And because of the black border, I know that it is already primed. So I can just stick this right in. You'll also see that I have given myself some masking, because I always tend to make a mess. And to make sure it is sitting level in there, I have some little spacers to stick in here. That will also ensure that the drain holes at the bottom here are clear. I don't know, this probably isn't necessary, but how could it hurt? I don't know, did that on the last one and it stayed in. So this glass actually fits pretty well, but as I mentioned, when I got two of them for a car that had to be much shinier than this one, and I didn't like how the lip of this seal overlapped around the outside of the frame because it looked kind of clunky. So I tried trimming it so it would set down flush into the frame. So the first one went exceptionally badly, and I had a real nasty uneven gap all around the outside. The second one worked well, and it looked quite nice. Anyways, this is the first windshield, so I had a nasty uneven gap all around the outside. It wasn't that bad considering the rest of the car, but to try to dress it up a little bit, I got some of this universal 5mm T-shaped weather stripping to trim that out. It's still kind of uneven, but it's marginally better. I don't know. We'll see how long that cheapo adhesive lasts. Anyways, the windshield is in. It stayed in one piece. That's a nice bonus. Let's keep putting the car together. Now, it has to go back up on jack stands for other reasons, but while it is at this nice convenient working height, I suppose I'll put the gutters on. Said gutters have been in my parts hoard for about 8 years, and if you know Mark IIs, you know these upper door seals like to turn into nothing. I found these at a salvage yard and they're very nearly perfect. They even appear to be OEM because they still have the felt seal. You can get reproductions from vintage rubber, but those are just straight rubber. So at the expense of them not being perfectly straight, those should help keep the water out of the insides and keep the floor made of floor. And this is one of the nice parts I have that I didn't get to use on that purple Jetta because of its abundance of doors. And to actually keep them on there, everyone's favorite clips. Although I do not believe the OEM material to be nothing, they do turn into nothing. But at least because of that, you can still find them pretty easily. So the left side went pretty well. You can see this texture right here. Usually we like to save the bacon for the fenders, but because this whole quarter panel was replaced by not me, this pinch weld up here was a little mutilated, and this is the best I could do with what I had. So to avoid tearing it again, I'm just gonna leave it like that. Oh well. Fun fact, this quarter panel has a sunroof drain back here. You may notice that up top we're bald. It is because of that and many booger welds, and if you remember the signage back here, that this was replaced by some half-ass body shop. I don't know. Speaking of this quarter panel, there's still a hole in it, so windows. And as with any window, what is affixed by its gasket, you just slot a bit of rope into the slot that captures the pinch weld. And then pulling it out from the inside might drag the gasket up and over and get it where you need it. Well, it almost worked like I said it would. This just needs a bit of a nudge. There are also originally the clips for the interior panel that go here, but I don't like how they chew into the metal, so I have made the conscious decision to leave them out. And see, I acted so competent that you didn't even notice this is a piece of 12-gauge wire, not some rope. Everything is a lie. And with that, we can move on to the aft end of the car, but first, an open letter to Mr. John Rust-Oleum. While I do appreciate your confidence in my ability to read, I do think it a bit cavalier to use the same exact cap on your flat black paint as your semi-gloss black paint. Had I read the label, I would have noticed this mistake, but instead a certain chinchilla has now added another color to the dumpster fire cup livery. So that's what that's about. Here's some taillights. Rather, here is a composite of all the taillights I had. Now, of course, there was an accident and both taillights kind of got smashed, but I did have two taillights that were nice except for the reverse light lenses. Luckily, somehow, those were the only lenses that survived. And through great tedium and a lot of heat and a lot of patience, I have transplanted those lights into these lights, lenses into these lights. I have transplanted those I don't know, I put some videos up. There was a broken piece right here too. It is no longer broken, so let's put them in. Also, before anyone asks, I don't have any US spec lights to sell. And if you want to know where I got them, I'm in the US, so this is just what they came with. They are prettier. And the socket has pissed off into the void. Awesome. Well, I guess it needs bulbs and connectors and stuff. I'm sure they work fine. We'll find out later. Maybe. I'd rather put the bumper on right now, but for that we'll need some altitude. And to finish up back here, of course, badges. This shell was Golf Diesel, but now an identity crisis has occurred. So we'll just cover up them holes. You may notice the finish of the paint. That's why I wanted flat black. And I didn't feel like welding, so for this hole I have a little circle of black vinyl. A circle, of course, because a circle is lighter than a square. And in the interest of staying on brand, even the badges will be mismatched. And with those looking like something, it's time to move forward to the doors. But it's going to be way easier to get some of the big chunks of the interior before I do that. So I have finished up the floor with some wire tidying and plugging the manufacturer holes. And of course I don't want to spend any money, so the GTI's carpet is just going back in. Albeit after a very aggressive clean with some Purple Power, the drill brush, and an extractor vacuum. And I will admit that the color of the juice that came out of the vacuum was a little horrifying. But it does look and smell a lot nicer now, albeit a bit faded. And I'd even swear that it's a bit lighter now. Pretty good enough. But before the dash goes in, I almost forgot about the ignition switch situation. If you weren't here last time, it's broke. And it's super duper easy. Once you're in here, there's just a screw. I guess I could make sure the new one's not a dud first. Lovely. Also, the key has to be on, or at least in for this because of the column lock peg. I forgot I'm putting the dash in. It is way easier with the stocks out of the way. I don't know. I sure would like to know what these wires are. My guess is we'll find out. And the original dash is actually pretty nice, save for some warping. Mercifully, it does not need to be perfect, which is good, because it's not gonna be. Oh, and I didn't put all the screws in, because you gotta do this. And if you're an experienced Mark II enjoyer, this whole area may look a bit wonky to you. That's because here in the US, all of the Golfs and GTIs we got until '87, I think, were built at the Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania plant, and they have a bunch of little things that are different about them. That is, I think, until the '87 model year. '88 and on, the ones we got were built in Mexico. However, all of the Jettas we ever got here were built in Wolfsburg. I don't know, I wasn't there. Anyways, this is what most Mark IIs had, this bezel that captures everything that screws into the dash. However, Westies like this car, not to be confused with a Westphalia van, two different kinds of Westies, they had this arrangement where the buttons in the center are mounted to the dash, and then this flimsy little bezel clips in on top of everything. This is much worse, but it is what I have. I don't know what I spilled on this screen, but it did not like it. One thing worth mentioning, originally, at least CE1 Mark IIs do not have a switched 12-volt power source to the stereo. So what most people do, and what I have done, is tap it off of the fan switch. Originally, I think it had a 5-volt on signal from the cluster. That's kind of dumb. And I'm aware there's nowhere to screw that screw into. This has always pretty much entirely been held on by the sliders, and it hasn't fallen out yet. These are also different between a Westie and all the other ones. That was fun to learn. Ah, that has to go in after the cluster. I wish I knew what I was doing. Well, I'm definitely going to need to take it out again, so it's going to stay like that. And moving upways to the dash speakers, these are a little bit annoying because the grill sits so close to them. And I'll admit to have splurged on the speakers. I've been using these 3.5-inch kickers on all of my Mark Is and Mark IIs for some time now. They're nice because they're coaxial, but the tweeter doesn't stick out a bunch like it's 2004. And also they sound quite nice. Oh, this is going to take a million years. I'll take the windshield back out. Another difference with the Westie dash are these speaker grills. On the Wolfsburg and Mexico dash, this little defroster duct is part of the grill and not the dash, which is why they are not interchangeable. And if you've ever seen a Mark II with these weird louvers here, that is why. It's because it's a Westie. And with that, it would be time for the lower dash and the center console, but the chinchilla from the previous video is still working on that, so I suppose I'll put together some of this stuff. And of course your headliner has to go in before the pillar trims, but I don't have one. I used to have a sunroof, now I don't. The headliner used to be plaid, now it's absent. That's why the pillar trims are plaid. And of course there is the little bit of rust at the front, but I kind of like it, and with any luck it should stay dry in here now. But while I had the windshield urethane out, I did re-glue the supports back to the roof skin because something had fallen on it and it was tuk-tuk, tuk-tuk. But it's nice and stiff now. And back here on the parcel shelf you will see my very sophisticated speaker mounting system consisting of zip ties and some sound deadening. Those aren't made for 6x9s, but there's 6x9s in there now. I did the sound deadening hopefully to seal it up a little better so it actually projects the sound up, so maybe I can hear it now. But speaking of sound deadening, you may have noticed there was none in the floor, so we'll see. Anyway, let's put some seats in. And also original to the GTI are these lovely specimens. I don't know what trims or models of car they would have come on, but they are quite pretty. Although I hadn't realized how nasty they had gotten over the past decade or so, so they got the bog standard scrub with some purple power and a drill brush. And then I sucked out all the chocolate milk with the extractor vacuum. And of course, because Mark II, both releases were missing, because those are originally rubber, and I could think of nothing more appropriate to replace them with than a zip tie. That works quite nice. And that's just going to stay bald in here since I don't have any hoopty rust repairs to cover up anymore, so that's done enough. And for the hardest Mark II flex of them all, please observe my completely unmutilated and very clean parcel shelf. Just beautiful. But you may notice something even more impressive. Look at this. Do you remember the good old days? I remember the good old days. Catch me at Pebble Beach. And moving back frontwards, we can see that another chinchilla has done some interior decorating. There are some gauges now. There is a center console and a lower dash. And to get that in there, obviously the ashtray has gone away, as has the bracket that mounted it to the lower dash. So instead I just have two clip nuts back here, and then here I have added a little flange what captures the two shifter mount bolts. This is a Volvo 240 shift knob that does not yet fit. We'll get to that later. And I think that's as done as it needs to be to put some front seats in, but first I still have to do the sills and the weather stripping. And these have somehow survived 40 years, so I don't need to do anything with them. For the most part. And after wrestling with everyone's favorite Mark II seat bushings, you'll notice I buy them in bulk. That's how much I enjoy it. We can install more of the original upholstery, I hope. Really? They both? Well, that was way too easy. Anyways, there's a reason I have to put this one in first. The inertia of my immense girth kinda bent it during the accident, so it is pushed ever so slightly towards port. I am hoping that I can just yank it towards starboard. Oh, that was very easy. Lovely. And it's been like that forever, so whatever. Nice. And with all the big chunks in, I can put the doors on, but first, the door strikers. Now, obviously, I don't have anywhere to put a dome light, but I would like it to work eventually. And I had even prepared, I 3D printed these out of the flexible stuff, these little gaskets for the door strikers, but these only work for the early style ones, but the only ones I can find right now are the later ones, and they are different. So I don't get to use those little pieces, which kinda sucks. Bruh. And this is the one thing I'm going to make look easy, because I may have done it a couple million times. Barely, kinda. I guess that can go away too. Oh, there's a door. And before I go adjusting on them, just to get the shut lines in the right zip code, some fenders. You may recognize this one from the very first episode of Baked Beans Garage. Of course, that episode is no longer canon. Oh, that's not too bad. The other one wasn't as fortunate. So here's just one I'd found in the shed. Oh, at least I have it framed so that you can't see the rust spot. Nice. Now, in my very first video, I talked about the pegs what mount the big bumper and the small bumper. You may be able to tell the white fender is from a big bumper car, but now they both have the pegs for the small bumper. And since I'm in North America, I have what is colloquially known as the banana light. And with the fenders on, to get them in the correct place, I need the chin panel. Now, I had originally hogged a hole in it to clear the intercooler piping, but now that is rerouted, so I'm just going to use this one. And I believe this is the point where I completely forgot I was working on getting the doors fitted. No matter. The fender has turned white, so I guess it's time to put a bumper on. And of course, my hilarious vanity plate never had to come off. And moving back up ways, of course, I have the core support for round headlights. So here are some round headlights. And these are just some bog standard H4 halogen conversions. The crosshair does nothing, but it looks cool. And I do realize that these are European beam patterns, which are not DOT approved, but they are correct for a left-hand drive car. Finally, for the grill, of course, we have the classic quad round grill. This also had a bunch of broken clips. It needed a bunch of plastic welding. It's better now. I found some nut plates that fit perfectly in the core support to mount it with screws instead of the zip ties that I had previously. And finally, the spotlights. I don't have the right adjusters for these, so they're just mounted with screws, which would make the aim all wrong. But as far as I can tell, these have the lenses glued on wrong, which is cool. But it doesn't really matter because these don't do anything. There's no wires or bulbs, but they do look nice. The hood was all mashed because of the rollover, so it took quite a lot of unmutilation or remutilation. I don't know, it's still dented, but it covers the engine. And finally, back to the doors. They needed some adjustment. I don't know, they fit good now. One thing I'm actually good at is finessing a Mark II door. I have done this a time or two. That's quite nice. Of course, it wasn't like that when I first put it together. I had to take the latch out, spray some greaseless lube in there, took the door handle off and gave it the same treatment, and spent quite a lot of time fiddling with this door striker here. Nice and shiny and new, you'll notice. But now they do that quite nicely, and they even sound half decent. And it's not even necessary to throw my hip into the door to get it to open. If you know Mark IIs, you'll understand that. Just observe. So nice. Oh, I guess I should see if the windows still go up. Nice. Anyways, there's still some stuff there to put together. But before I permanently put the gauge cluster in, there is something I will do with the lighting. Now, in the last Mark II I put together, I found these nifty little LEDs, what are meant to go in the cluster on some domestic garbage. I don't remember. Doesn't matter. I saw the eBay listing, and based on some ichrometer measurements, I thought they would work. And I was able to graft those into the bulb holders for the two floodlights at the top of the cluster, and I was pretty happy with the results, so I have done the same thing here. And of course we have the Westy specific dash trim bezel piece. Now these like to fall apart when you look at them too hard, so I have given it a few plastic staples in the thin bits. And finally, I found some delicious new pedal pads. And I think that makes for a complete interior. So I guess it's time to try to push some buttons and stuff. We'll cut off the 5,000 lumen dome light for some mood. Also, consider this my review of the GoPro Hero 10 Black's low light capabilities. Are you enjoying the artifacts? Aren't they pretty? I don't know why I expected the cluster lights to come on. Lovely. Oh no. This head unit is only blue. That's horrible. Oh, and it says it's connecting, but it's already connected. How about some lights? The high beam switch is not connected to the thingy it needs to be connected to. And you may notice that the taillights look rather bright. That's because when I was working on the taillights, I replaced all of the reflective material with some speed tape. I'm quite happy with those results. And I also got a rear view mirror up in there. Westy Golfs originally had the mirror glued to the windshield with the little button, but those always fall off, so here's 2 riv nuts and some screws. And with that, the interior is done for now, till I take it apart again. We'll see. Anyways, moving to the back of the car, the last part of the body that needs addressed is the hatch. Of course, since this is a shell swap, I have to change over the lock cylinder so my key works. But while I was in there, I discovered that I now have 2 dead rear wiper motors, so I just gave it the old Delito torpedo. And I found some rubber grommets for some random Volvo that fit in those holes quite nicely. Good enough. And this hatch is from a base Golf, so I wanted to add in the GTI window surround. So I painted that in with some flat black and then lightly buffed it to give it some weathering. But since this hatch is an 85, the car is now an 86, and this hatch is a base Golf, the car is now a GTI, we need a center brake light and a spoiler. Suppose I don't need the spoiler, but I sure do want it. Now when I took this off, all the studs broke because they were quite crusty, but it doesn't really matter because I don't have any holes to screw it into. I have been recommended by the internet to just glue it on, so we're going to see how that works. So here I have some Sikaflex P2G primerless to glass. I don't know, that's what the guy on Vortex said. Guess we'll find out. Now obviously I only have one try at this, which is terrifying, of course. And in here I have done some things off camera, and the rear windshield exploded in the accident. Both of the clips were broken off of here, so I'm just gonna glue the whole chassis to there. There is now a wire with some lights to plug into that. I'm pretty convinced by that. At least I'll be able to see through the glass if it ever starts to let go, but I don't think so. Just need to perform the ritual. That's not going anywhere. Nice. And of course I'm starting over in terms of stickers. So there is one more detail I need to add to the hatch. Not sponsored. Of course, if you've been following the series, I don't need to explain that. Okay, I may have lied. 2 more details. And with the hatch done, it's finally time to make the wheels fit. I believe this is the second time I have learned for the first time that my cheapo fender roller is too small to use on a Mark II. Nothing a little percussive persuasion can't fix. And at long last, the car is finally put together. Now, if you've been following this series, you'll know that all this suspension is still very fresh and unadjusted. So now that all the weight is back in the car, I can finally set it back on the suspension, figure out where the wheels need to be, and point them vaguely in the same direction. So let's try that. So I'm going to gloss over this a little bit because I don't really recommend you do it yourself, but to at least get it close enough to drive it to an alignment shop. And by that I mean to get it permanent and it's just going to be what it is. You'll see here I have a piece of wood butted up right against the pinch weld because I know those are parallel with the center line of the car. To it I have zip tied a piece of extruded aluminum from one of my dead shop lights because I know it's straight. And then with the steering wheel centered and the rack centered from before, I can measure that distance and that distance to the wheel, not to the tire. And then I can fiddle with the tie rods, run them in and out to get my measurements perfect, or as perfect as this setup will allow. But like I said, I did it last time. Car drove straight and the tires wore evenly. And the secret ingredient, you will see some grease plates. That is just some plates with some grease in the middle. Don't forget the grease or else you will just have some plates. Also, don't forget the plates or else you'll just have some grease. And that'll let the tire squish around and find where it needs to be without loading up the bushings. But once that is dialed in, I can wriggle around underneath the car and tighten up all the bolts on the bushings. And to actually deal with the few things I said I'd deal with later, the high beam switch I just had to take apart and put back together. Now it works. As it turns out, the blue stereo did bother me enough to change it, so there's a green one now. To make the brick shift knob work, I just made a little adapter that mounts it with some set screws. And apparently I finally got tired of looking at the rusty steelies, so they're nice and fresh again. I guess all that's left is some glamour shots. So I guess the car's kind of done. And of course there's that road trip I mentioned at the beginning of the video, about 400 miles. That is me moving. So this is the last video that will be filmed in the glorious Baked Beans shed. Now my only concern for said road trip is the turbo. I have noticed it does smoke a little bit after it sits for a while and when it first starts. I had noticed a little bit of oil in the intake previously. These engines are kind of known to do that through the PCV system, but it doesn't have a PCV system. The crankcase just goes to atmosphere unless you're the EPA, in which case it has a PCV system. But it did go upside down into a ditch a little while ago, so there might just be some oil left in the intercooler. I'll just take some of the pipes off the turbo. If there's oil at the turbo, I know I'm in trouble. Well, shit. I probably should have seen that coming. It's typical for these to have a little bit of radial play in the shaft, which means side to side, but you know it's cooked if the shaft goes in and out, which this one kind of does. This video is still over, don't worry. I'll probably work this into the next video at the beginning of the road trip, I hope. Now, of course, I did already buy a turbo. This is a KO4 from everyone's favorite Chinesium brand, Max Peating Rods. However the hell you're supposed to say that. It kind of fits, it kind of doesn't fit. We'll get to that later. Now, if you're still here, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. Of course, I appreciate you. If you found the video entertaining, informative, something like that, hit whatever buttons you can find down there. Mainly the subscribe button. Click bell. The algorithm likes that. A big thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon, whichever side of me they're on. I love you. This has been Baked Beans Garage. I am overdue for a dust bath. I will see you next time.